Hi, welcome back to Thousand Words. I'm Matt Addington. I appreciate you stopping by again. Thank you to those of you who have subscribed either to the YouTube channel or to the podcast, which is available now on Apple iTunes. I've had a lot of folks inquire about, especially podcast listeners, which I guess has been more popular than I anticipated, but asking about seeing the images that we're talking about. And that's a great question and a great thought. So I will, in the show notes, link those back to my blog, where I'll post all the images, both for this episode, and I'll even go back to some of the old ones and put those photos in, so that those of you that are just listening along are able to go back and take a look at exactly what we were talking about. I'm super excited today for part 1 of 2 with my friend Yasmin Tajik, a photographer from Scottsdale, Arizona. We go way back to middle school, high school times in Rochester, Minnesota. And I'm going to just kind of let Yasmin tell her a little bit of her photography journey. But thanks for coming on today from Scottsdale, Arizona to tell some stories and to hear what your 1,000 words are.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's so great to see your face. You know, it's been years since we've been able to see each other. And yeah, I mean, it's been so fun. You mentioned Instagram, and Instagram, I absolutely love it. I have so many different accounts on there that I'm following, and to be able to watch people's journey and to be inspired by what people are putting out there, how they're telling stories, all that really has been a driving force for me to not only share the stories that I'm telling, but get inspiration from other photographers, find new places to photograph, and find other organizations to network with and all that. So yeah, so photography for me was, I think like a lot of photographers, it's just something that started as a hobby, you know, something I just kind of picked up and did for many years. And then it wasn't until I finished my MBA, that it was in 2006, that I really got a little more serious about working in photography. And it was sparked by finding a local photographer in Las Vegas. I was living there at the time, and she was a pet photographer, and I loved her work. I went in with my 2 dogs. She photographed us, and I said, I want to work for you. I know nothing about photography, but I want to work for you. And she had only been open like 6 months at the time. And she's like, yeah, I don't have a need for employees yet. But I just stayed in contact with her. I kind of self-educated myself on photography. Like I was reading as much as I could and reaching out to other photographers and all that, and asking questions. You were one of them that I was reaching out to when I was starting out. And you were so gracious with answering questions, and, you know, even minor questions like, what lenses do I need, you know, type of things. Right. Yeah. So it was great. I ended up, 2 years later, I ended up working for this pet photographer, and really it was a wonderful experience. She was like a mentor to me. She was running a high-end like boutique photography studio. And so I got to basically put into practice what I learned through my MBA about running a business, but then applying it into the photography industry. So that was really wonderful. And
you do need to, so you were like most photographers, it's hard to just say, I'm starting photography full-time and that's what we do. We all kind of, those of us that are lucky enough to have this as our profession that pays our bills, there's been some level of transition from doing whatever, the other part of our world was, and photography sort of morphs its way into, in a perfect world, being able to be full-time. And you don't have to elaborate on it for too long, but tell me, or tell all of us, like, what your super unique job was in Las Vegas while you were kind of transitioning into your photography studio opening.
Oh yeah, I was working with lobsters. So my background before photography is working with animals, and most of them was working with marine animals. So with dolphins and whales, and doing research and training and all that stuff. And I eventually found myself in Las Vegas working with lobsters at a couple of the different hotel casinos. So that was my full-time job, which what I found was very fulfilling. I love working with animals in different capacities and all that. But photography really was, like I mentioned, it was a hobby of mine for many years. And then I started getting more serious about it. So while I was working that full-time job, I was refining my skill set, learning more about photography. And actually, that's when I started my photography business. Right. So I was running it, my business while I was still working a full-time job. And I did that for 4 years because I wanted to build up my clientele and all that. And eventually then made the transition to running photography full-time.
Right. So if we go way back to your Instagram feed from way back, we're going to see a lot of lobster pictures. Is that right? That you were kind of honing your craft, like trying to do both jobs, and these super like shallow depth of field lobster pincher photos and stuff. I'm gonna definitely go back and dig into that. So you had this, you opened your studio in Las Vegas, which still is kind of up and running. You're kind of back and forth with Shalimar Studios, and obviously we'll put the link here. Kind of your portrait, maybe some weddings, some people, some kids, some pets, all of that kind of stuff. That's where a lot of people start, because there is such a market for that. And like we talked off camera, to be able to have those relationships and kind of build clientele through that and just get to know people is super, super important. But you had a really important kind of sit down with your mom, it sounds like, at some point in that studio photography life, and kind of tell me where things turned at that point that you had that conversation with your mom.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was running Shalimar Studios, and I still run it. And it's a big part of what I do because it focuses on heirloom portraiture and all that. But I did, my family, my parents are immigrants, and I was born and raised in Minnesota, and I was raised with two different cultures. So, there came a point in my photography where I felt very much drawn to telling different types of stories. And I just specifically, very specifically sat down with my mom one day, and, you can see all the National Geographic sitting behind there. So that was a big influence for me, and for a lot of photographers it is. And really just sat down with my mom and had a conversation with her. And I said, I just feel like I need to do something differently with my photography, and something that is not just documenting families and their life events, but something that is a little bit more advocacy based or humanitarian based. And National Geographic was a big part of that. And I just said, I feel like I need to do something different. And that's really where documentary type photography comes in, which is more storytelling, and a lot of me partnering with different humanitarian organizations, charities, either documenting what they're doing or maybe on a topic that needs to be shared more, to bring awareness on it and all that. So that really was a big kind of moment for me, and kind of helped me transition to adding into Shalimar Studios, having that running, but adding on to that kind of like a separate business and which that I focused on as well.
And, those two things, you've got this wildly successful, studio business where you're able to, like you said, provide heirloom portraits and these things that for the people at the other end of it are timeless and are super important to their lives. You come away from that, the gratification you get there is that you've been able to share that with them. You're not, and I've had this conversation with clients before, like, I'm so grateful that I'm able to share those with you. I'm not going to print them and put them on my wall at home, but I know that you are, and that's super important. But to have this passion project and where your heart was really calling you in that conversation with your mom, and where those two things can, I'm sure they kind of weave back and forth for you, where they do align is just kind of finding that perfect sweet spot as a photographer. And you've been able to travel the world, countries all over the world, and see just incredible things. And there's so many of your images that we could sit and talk about. And I really, really hope people will go and, check out your Instagram feed and just go back and kind of see all of the wonderful places that you've been able to go. But one of those passion projects, those humanitarian projects, was this first image that we're going to talk about, which is from Kenya, which Kenya is close to my heart, as well as our family has spent a bunch of time there in similar type roles. But this image of this woman was kind of one of those things that really, you said it set my heart leading to doing this thing that I'm doing. So tell us about this woman, about this photo, this portrait, the everything else that goes along with such a powerful image.
Oh, thank you. It's one of my absolute favorites, and it was taken on a safari that I did in Kenya, like you mentioned. The Samburu tribe is kind of like a sister tribe to the Maasai that a lot of people are very aware of. I know you've done some work in the Maasai Mara and all that too. This trip was actually really interesting because it was like, I'm going to date ourselves. That was my 40th birthday gift. And, like a safari for many people, it's, that's the dream trip. And, you go and you see the animals and all that. But again, I'm so connected to my heritage and to my culture because I'm first generation born. So I'm very much drawn to cultural aspects of storytelling and sharing cultural aspects of other cultures so people can learn from it, because I feel like that's where, when we see the similarities, that's where the connections are made. So we went and spent a day in a local Samburu village. And, this is really, when specifically remember taking that image. This is really that image when I took it, I thought, this is exactly where I need to be, and I did as much research ahead of time as I could about the Samburu. And like I said, they're very similar to the Maasai. But there's also things about their culture and their traditions that are really tough to kind of fathom that still go on in these days, which is like the female genital mutilation, which is very common in around Kenya and in other countries as well. And I'm not going to go into all the details about it, but, if I can photograph a woman and show her beauty and show her value and show how they contribute to society and all that, that's really where I felt my calling is if I can take a photograph that can be used to advocate towards something positive, towards bringing about positive change, advocating for people that need help, things like that. That's really I really do remember taking that photo and going, this is exactly where I need to be. When you're put in a village and people aren't familiar with you, you don't know the language, how can you photograph something that is going to be respectful of them and their traditions and their cultures, but also document what's going on. So this was like midday. It was burning hot. And they're wearing these beautiful clothes, and the clothing has meaning and their jewelry has meaning, all that sort of stuff. So that really kind of sent me on this trajectory. I was like, this is where I need to be. This is what I feel so deeply that I'm called to do. And really that transition into me photographing like this whole collection of images that has made its way onto my fine art print store. So not only can I sell the fine art prints now of these beautiful people and share about their culture, but there's an advocacy part to it where a portion of the print sales then gets donated back to help the Samburu people.
That's awesome. How like you said, I think the time of day, you can tell the sun's high in the sky, and it was probably one of you didn't pose her, this just happened. And I've taken several the same way, but there's something just like so captivating. We look at images of people who are different than us, and there's something about that. And probably even, going back to your story about Steve McCurry's cover of National Geographic with the Afghani girl, there was something so captivating about that made people stop. And this Samburu woman, same thing, but there's something so captivating about it with her, the decor that she's wearing. And if you've ever watched them do the beading is so intricate. And I was able to photograph women doing that beading on my last trip there, and just kind of blows your mind, the level of detail, and ultimately to just see that whole thing come together. But I think even in the background, you shot it with a, pretty shallow depth of field, but there's story behind her in that very well could be her home back there. It's a grass and mud hut. There's so much more to this that tells more about the culture. And I think you've done that so amazingly through the documentary stuff that you've done, and being able to tell more of a story than setting up something that's perfectly studio lit.
Yeah, thank you, by the way, because I look at your work too, and I'm always so amazed with it. But I think, and that's something that I think comes with experience is, it's easier for us as newer photographers, we get started and we can get that nice portrait, right? We can crop in, get a nice portrait, headshot, families, all that. But the documentary work, really, that is where, I think it's a little bit more nuanced, because you do want to bring in those elements, is show the setting, and you can see like how brightly her clothes are compared to how stark the landscape is. It's just dry, and you can just feel like it's dry and like this super desert landscape and desolate, and then you see their huts there, and as you learn and kind of dive into learning more about them, you learn that they're nomads, so they'll spend 5-6 years in those locations, and those huts go down, and then they move on somewhere else, and they have to build those huts again. And it also speaks to how their cultural society is built up. So the Samburu, the men are allowed to have more than one wife, so each wife has her own menyata, which is their little hut, and how they build them and all that. And so that is something that's really important, I feel, for the documentary and storytelling. It's bringing in those other elements. And like you mentioned, the Afghani girl that was on National Geographic, there's one of the reasons why that image spoke so much to me, and that I try to kind of emulate that in my own documentary work, is it's a tighter shot, it's a portrait of her, but if you look at her clothing, it's tattered. She was a refugee. And then the most striking part is her eyes. She has these like green eyes, which are stunning. But the educational and advocacy part that comes through for that is that a lot of people don't know, in the north of Pakistan and India is the Silk Route, and that's where all the tradesmen would go through and all that. And so there's a lot of people back in the day when that was the major trade route that they would stop and stay, and they started mingling with the locals in those areas. So you have people in northern India and northern Pakistan that have much more fair skin. They have green eyes. Some of them even have blonde hair. So to me, that became just such an important way of telling story. Is not only is this a beautiful woman, and her eyes are so striking, but there's a historical aspect to it. Like, why would she have green eyes when that's not very common in that part of the world? And then you start learning about, the history of people coming through those areas, and how the traditions from other parts of the world were dropped there, or how traditions from that part of the world were dropped in other countries and all that. So that, going back to that National Geographic image, it just keeps on playing in my mind, is what can I tell in a photo that maybe someone wouldn't know as they dive deeper into learning more about this person, or about the culture, or the location that it was taken.
Obviously, you had a personal connection just with your family, kind of the Pakistani history in your family, and that obviously played into just the emotions of what you felt with that image too.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, actually, where it was photographed was very close to where my dad grew up in Pakistan. So, and it's something that I could look at too. If my parents decided not to stay in the US after my dad completed his medical training, that could have very well been me. We would have gone back to Pakistan, and my dad was born and raised in a very tribal area, very close to the Afghanistan border. And his father and his grandfather each ran a missionary hospital. So, that could have been me. So I'm very, it's very aware, to me, I feel very privileged that to be living here in the US and to have the opportunities that I've had for education and to own a business and all that. But, one easy decision could have been a whole different trajectory for me.
Right.
So, knowing and being so close to my own culture and all that, and I keep saying this again through my documentary work, that's really what drives me for telling stories.
That's been one of the things that's struck me so hard about my time in Kenya, is that, I look at these people and just, I want to know their story as well. And their story is, incredibly simple if you want to compare it to what we know, but at the same time, it's complex, and it's, their lives have taken turns and gone directions because of the circumstances they're in. And I've really come to realize that they don't need us giving them money or giving them clothes. I think two things that we can do that benefit them most is one, like, giving them training and teaching them and helping empower them. But then the other part is being able to help tell their story to the world, like you're doing, because, a woman like that, she will never have a chance to tell her story to the world. Let's, be realistic. But to have folks like you that are out there helping tell their story, that's one of the true gifts that we can give to them, even though they probably will never know it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's giving them basically an avenue that they don't have, to share their story. And like you said, I think a lot of us, I me included, like we go in and we kind of have like this idea of what we think they need, to have a better life because we're
Mhm.
looking at it from our perspective and the things that we have and technology and all that. And I think when we really break it down and go back and look at some of these societies that are living what we would consider primitive, I mean, they're much happier in certain ways, and really there's just such a deep connection to the elders in their society
Mhm.
and to the storytelling and to passing down those traditions from the elders to the young and all that. And it's we all came from that, and we've just evolved differently. We live in different parts of the world, but
Right.
I feel like when I can tell the story of someone, those same kind of threads keep coming out. We all want the same things, whether we live in a 3,000 square foot home or a 30 square foot, hut. We all want a food on our table. We all want a roof over our head. We all want our families to be happy and healthy.
Mhm.
So I feel like telling those stories can kind of break down some of those barriers because it's very easy for us to look at an image like that and go, oh, she's so far away.
Yeah.
How am I going to help?
You feel sad for them even though they
Right.
are.
For them.
Yeah, I've realized like they are experiencing a joy that we are frantically chasing in our world. And
Yeah.
they've got it. It's like they've they've just like distilled down and have the joy, like I said, that we are so desperately seeking. They might be and very very likely are experiencing it without all of the distractions of the things that
Yeah.
we've got in our world.
Absolutely. And it's so, and I just took my dog up to this little remote lake about an hour and a half away. We were walking in the snow, no one around. And it was just such a great respite. Fresh air. It was nice and cool. And I was like, oh, I felt so grounded.
Mm.
And I was like, I feel like that's kind of how they are too. They're very grounded into the life experience and to helping others and all that. And they don't have those distractions that we
Mhm.
do. So,
Yeah.
kind of like you said, like we come from our perspective and we think, oh, poor them, they don't have this, they don't have that.
Right.
But then, when you really look at the main things that are important in life, they've got them,
Yeah.
and they're really achieving them in such a different way than we are.
Right.
So
Right.
it's definitely a way for us to learn as well, like going in and photographing them and telling their stories is one thing, but it's a learning experience for me every time I'm going into a new situation, and photographing them as well.
Yeah.
It's very much a two-way street
Yeah.
there.
I've always felt like coming back from there, like I'm the one that's getting something out of this,
Yeah.
which is, kind of not what we think going in, but
Right.
that's great. You've mentioned your dogs a couple times, and your history with, working with, marine biology and the lobsters. Don't get me wrong, I'm not forgetting about the lobsters, but animals and the story of animals is also is one that's super important to you. The next image that we're going to pull up is another one from Kenya of some elephants that I think has become a signature image for you and your kind of the cause for animals. I want to talk about that, and I want to also talk about your horse image. But tell us a little bit about this image with the elephants, its backstory, and where that's kind of helped take you with the Great Plains Foundation and kind of your whole cause behind that.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite images I've ever taken on safari is that it was actually in the Samburu National Park, so very close to where that previous image was photographed. And you've been on safari before, maybe some people have, but this was actually right at sunset. We were just driving along on the road, and what is so fantastic is just alongside the road was this game path, which is basically a path that these elephants have been walking for years and years and years. And as we kind of came up to the ones that were at the back, we slowly kind of paralleled along with them, and the line was just going. I mean, there was probably about 40 or 50 elephants in this herd. It was unbelievable. It's as some people know, when you come across these herds of elephants, it's mainly led by a matriarch, which is an older female, and like her sisters and cousins, and then the youngins. And they live in these matriarchal societies, and they walk these ancient paths. They know where the water is, they know where the where to find food, all that sort of stuff. And it was this, we're bouncing down the road. How do you get this? How do you get a,
Need
a clear
the
shot?
image stabilization, please. Yeah.
Right. That's huge. Um, but I actually was hand holding it because we weren't just standing still. I couldn't rest it on the vehicle because it was just bouncing around too much. And just, sometimes you're put in this situation, you're like, I don't know which way to even turn because everything could be such a great shot.
Yeah.
And, it just so happened we have the walking, we've got this beautiful sunset behind. And that the way that these elephant societies really speak to me, because again, they're these ancient societies, matriarchal societies. They value the elders. The elders teach the young. That's a common theme that kind of comes up in my work a lot. But the animal thing, like I didn't grow up with animals. I didn't grow up on a farm, anything like that. I got my first dog when I was 16, after begging my parents, every year for a horse or, things like that. But, there was just something with animals that always spoke to me. There was, the way that you can communicate with animals, the way you can train them or just spend time with them out in nature and all that. So, finally getting my first dog at 16 and then having dogs as I've gotten older and all that, and after college going out to Hawaii and working with dolphins in a facility training and doing research with language, like can they understand language, things like that. Even the research I did with humpback whales, we would do photo identification studies. So as the whales would dive down, we would photograph the underside of their tails and you can identify individuals. And then year after year, who's coming back to Hawaii, who went to Japan this year, who went down to Baja, all that sort of stuff. So there's been a long theme of working with animals. So the elephant image, when I knew I wanted to start my fine art print store, that was definitely a thing I wanted to focus on as well, is some sort of advocacy and giving back to organizations that are helping animals. And so one of the ones that I followed for many years are photographers Derek and Beverly Jobert. They live in Botswana. They're National Geographic photographers. Their stuff is all over the internet, really they do amazing work. And their foundation that they started basically goes into different parts in Botswana. And it used to be a huge hotspot for poaching. And they've seen just areas decimated with animals, not living there anymore. And you can see how it affects the environment as well. So what they've been able to do is they've been able to go and buy different plots of land and they turned it into sustainable tourism. So instead of people that live there going into poaching because it's more lucrative, they're actually making more money in the tourism industry. So they've seen the animals come back. They've seen the landscape change. So what's great is this this elephant image and some of the other images from the wildlife collection on my fine art store. 20% of that purchase price gets donated back to Great Plains Foundation. So
awesome.
We're helping advocate for them. We're helping them educate the locals on how the animals live, their environment, their prey, all that sort of stuff. So they appreciate the animals in a different way than they have before, instead of just seeing it as a way to put food on their table through poaching. Is now they feel like they can make more money, they can advocate for the animals and live cohesively with them, and they're seeing their whole environment change too. So that's
wonderful.
That's another heart project for me.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and again, it's kind of like we talked about before, where that's whether you're giving 20% or not, you're shedding light on just that whole idea of the anti-poaching thing, and seen the poaching thing in different parts of Africa that I've been as well. And let's be honest, part of what I do is the hunting industry is a big part of the work that I do as well, which I think there's a whole nother story to that. It's not two different worlds, but the poaching thing is truly the one that, there's just so, there's no winners in that. There's the handful of folks that are doing it, but it's corrupt and it's sad. And to have an organization, like the Joberts have started now that you're contributing to is truly like helping so many things flourish, and really just kind of squashing that out. So I think any of the anti-poaching stuff that I've followed and tried to be involved with has been just really a noble story. So obviously we'll put a link to your wildlife stuff, but any other, animals that are favorites to photograph that you've had in Kenya or in Africa in general?
Well, there's one incident that was in Botswana, and I was actually on safari with my parents and my brother and his wife. And, we're just out in the vehicle, just kind of tooling around. And that's kind of how the safaris go. You just kind of go out and kind of look around, see what you can find. And, sometimes the rangers are on the call to, hey, we found something over here. Hey, we found something over there. And this is why the rangers are so great, is we're just down the road and we're all kind of, we're untrained versus the rangers, and we're all just kind of looking at eye level, just kind of scanning. And the ranger stops the vehicle and he points up into a tree and he says, there's a leopard up there. And we were like, oh my gosh, how did you even see that? He goes, let's just kind of hang out for a little bit. And sure enough, the leopard's up in the tree, there's impala nearby. And, within about 5 minutes, these impala come underneath the tree. And, I've got my camera ready for everything, I gave my sister-in-law a camera, my dad a camera, like I had everybody ready.
Yeah.
And we didn't know what was going to happen or if anything was going to happen. And within minutes, before we even knew it, this leopard jumped out of the tree, about a 30-foot drop, directly down onto an impala. Killed the impala, the others scattered. And I mean, I was like, I can't think of another time that my hands were shaking so much from adrenaline. And I was wondering if I was going to even get the shot. And so this was really fantastic. I mean, just like a once in a lifetime catch, type of thing. So got it on photo, got some video of it as well. Nat Geo actually picked it up, which was really fantastic. Awesome. And we just got to see the whole thing unfold, how the kill happened. It tried dragging the prey up into the tree, ended up falling out of the tree with the prey, just the whole thing spiraling. It was just really fantastic. So ever since then, the leopard has been a definite favorite. They're, same type of thing, they're kind of these little maternal little groupings that they have, and they raise their young and then they go off on their own, type of thing. And again, it's that the elders passing down the knowledge to the young, and then the younger kind of let out into the world. So I definitely have a spot in my heart for the leopards because of that experience.
That's awesome. Safaris are that way, where there's so much happening. And honestly, you could never even you could just be holding your camera and taking pictures, and they're going to be beautiful, because that's kind of the nature of safari, whether it be this, the Samburu Park or the Masai Mara and the Mara Triangle or wherever it is, incredible scenery. But to know those stories and get to know more than just, hey, there's a elephant and there's this. I had the image where we spent, a couple hours with that female cheetah, and our rangers, like you said, they're brilliant. They know these animals. She had just lost all of her cubs, like in the 24 hours prior. So we had watched her just very stoic, but once you come to understand the story, it's almost like you can see that in their body language, and kind of come to understand the way they move and the things they're doing. And this was a kind of a sad reality of life on the Mara, but it was it made the majesty of the photos I was able to capture with her even more more authentic, I guess. So very very cool.
That's one of the things I love about what you're doing is getting to hear those stories. And because sometimes as photographers, we do these portfolio reviews, and someone will come in very objectively and they'll tell you, this is good, this is not good, all that sort of stuff. And as photographers, because we know the backstory, sometimes we hold on to some of these images that maybe might not be the best image, for a particular client or job to market, things like that. But these stories are really what we advocate with, that's really how we just kind of pull everything forward, and I think helps drive us to want to tell more stories.
Even back to the McCurry image, where you could look at that and like we were saying, it's an image that stops you and captures you, just because of the eyes pull you in, but the tattered clothes. But to hear what you're saying, and I was unaware of the backstory with it, and we all have. Whether it's you or I with big fancy cameras and lenses and traveling to different places in the world, or if it's somebody with their cell phone taking a picture of their son or daughter riding their bike for the first time, or flying a kite, or there's things that I don't know. That's one of the intriguing things with you know, with photography is just that there is a story, there is 1,000 words behind every image, and the ability to share those is not always, you know, feasible on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter or whatever. You can have an image that people look at and think it's very pretty, and that's wonderful, but to know more about it is I think essential, and to have an opportunity to share those conversations, I'm super grateful that, you know, we're able to talk through those. So be sure and join us next week as we roll with part 2 with Yasmin Tajik, talking more photos, more travels, more adventures.